The sun hung low over Lexington, Kentucky, casting a golden glow over the streets still damp with morning dew. The light filtered through the bare branches of the trees, glinting off the windshields of cars lining up for work. The city was just waking up, but there was something quiet in the air, like something was waiting to happen. In the white and blue patrol car parked at the curb near the intersection of Ashland Avenue, Officer Mark Anderson adjusted his rearview mirror for the third time. His gaze was absent but alert, like a predator stalking its prey from afar. He leaned back in his seat, idly scanning the traffic ahead with a practiced eye, or so he thought. Beside him, Officer Emily Carter, younger, sharper, tapped a pen into a small notebook. She was reviewing her notes from the call earlier, a family argument that had gone nowhere, but left her feeling like something was missing. Everything seemed peaceful that morning, until a shiny car came into view. A jet-black sedan, a luxury car, brand new, swept past like a breeze. The driver was an African-American woman in her early 30s. She wore a tailored navy suit, her hair neatly pulled back, her face sharp and determined. Her posture was straight, her hands resting lightly on the wheel, no rush, no anxiety. Just a woman driving to work. But Mark's gaze sharpened. Something about it made him uncomfortable. Maybe it was the overcome, or the appearance of success that challenged him. He raised his eyebrows and muttered. "Look at that." His voice was low, but each word dripped with contempt. "Fancy car. She must be hiding something." Emily looked up, glancing at the woman through the windshield. She wasn't speeding. She didn't give a false signal. She wasn't breaking anything, she said, her voice cautious but firm. "What's the problem?" Mark ignored her, his hand already reaching for the flashing light button on the dashboard. A smile flickered at the corner of his mouth, not exactly friendly, but pleased with the action he was about to take. "Let's see," he said, pulling the car around behind the sedan. The car in front slowed, as if it had known this was coming. The turn signal clicked on just in time, and the car pulled over to the side of the road with ease. There was no sign of panic, just a quiet composure, as if the driver had been stopped dozens of times and learned to deal with it. Emily glanced out the window, noticing the slight tension in the woman's shoulders as they pulled up behind her. It wasn't fear, it was anticipation. She sensed something was wrong. "Mark, this isn't right," Emily whispered, opening the door and following him. "You have no legitimate reason to stop her." "Stay, rookie," Mark interrupted. His hand went to his gun holster, an unconscious reflex. "I've been doing this for 20 years. I know a suspect when I see one." They walked to the window, which was rolled down, revealing Grace Williams's face. Her expression was calm, her dark eyes cold but bright. She wasn't angry. She wasn't afraid. There was just a quiet determination in them, as if she were ready for whatever was coming. Grace Williams looked at the two officers in front of her, then softly said, "Is there a problem, officer?" "Good evening, officers." Grace's voice was even, calm as a lake on a windless night. She looked out the car window, the streetlights reflecting dimly in her eyes. "Is there a problem?" The question was simple, but there was something in the air that made it heavy. Mark leaned toward the car door, his tall shadow falling across the interior, swallowing the remaining light. "License and registration," he barked, ignoring her question. His voice was impatient, unnaturally harsh. Grace moved slowly, her hands slow, careful, as if one wrong move could trigger something irreversible. She took the papers from her bag, placing them on the dashboard before sliding them through the narrow opening. Emily stood by, watching silently. She was Mark's backup, a young but observant officer. She noticed every little detail, especially the slight tremor in Grace's fingertips. Not enough to be called fear, but enough to set Emily's instincts off. Something was wrong. Not Grace. Mark. He was different. His demeanor was aggressive, lacking restraint. Mark had always been cool but professional during their previous inspections. This time, something was off. "What brings you to this part of town, Miss Williams?" Mark asked, scanning Grace's papers with a sharp gaze. His voice carried a distinctly suspicious tone, as if he had a script in mind. Grace tilted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his, not avoiding it. "I'm on my way to a meeting," she answered, her voice oddly even. Mark's lips twitched, a half-smile that was unkind. It must be an important meeting to be driving like this. An invisible knot tightened in Emily's stomach. The air felt thick. A few passers-by had started to turn to look, eyes filled with suspicion and concern. She took a step toward Mark. "Mark," she said softly, her voice steady, a little warning. "She's cooperating. We don't need to push things any further." But Mark was already moving forward, his hand on the door handle. A second later, the door swung open. "Get out," he ordered. The voice was no longer the command of an officer, it was the imposition of naked power. Grace paused for a second. Her composure was shaken, but she quickly regained her composure. "Is there a reason for this, officer?" Her voice was steady, not a trace of trepidation. "I said get out." Mark roared and yanked the door open. Grace unbuckled her seatbelt. She stepped out of the car, each movement slow and precise, as if she were walking a tightrope. She stood on the sidewalk, trying to keep a safe distance. Emily's heart pounded. She was no longer just an observer. Mark grabbed Grace's arm. His grip tightened, pulling her against the side of the car as if she were a dangerous criminal. Grace paused, losing her balance for a moment, but caught herself on the door frame to keep from falling. "Enough!" Emily blurted, stepping forward. Her voice was no longer gentle. It was an order. And it carried a warning. Grace's voice trembled, but she stood tall, her gaze unwavering. The chill air seeped through the shoulders of her coat, which she had just tightened, but nothing could obscure her determination. "I did nothing wrong," she said, her voice low, but clear as a knife in the darkness. Mark glared at her, his gaze razor-sharp, challenging and undisguisedly hostile. "Stay away from this rookie, Grace," he growled, gesturing to Emily, who was standing just a few feet away. Grace turned, facing him without blinking. She met Mark's glare and did not flinch. "This is harassment, Officer Anderson," she announced, each word carefully measured. Her voice was calm, but like the surface of still water concealing the raging undercurrents beneath. "I know my rights." Mark smiled, a cold smile that made the air around him seem thick. He leaned closer to her, his breathing heavy. "Rights are what I say they are," he said, his voice contemptuous. Grace clenched her jaw twitching slightly with restraint, but she didn't back away. Not one step. Emily, standing nearby, could feel her heart beating faster with each beat. A wave of emotions surged through her, fear, anger, and an urgent sense of responsibility. This was no longer a simple stop. This was a defining moment. A boundary. The tension around the car was like a storm that had been building for too long, and it was about to explode. Mark suddenly tightened his grip on Grace's arm and pushed her hard against the side of the car. The impact sent her bag sliding off her shoulder, onto the sidewalk. Her belongings were scattered, a phone, a small notebook, a few odds and ends. Grace took a deep breath, straining to keep her composure. "This isn't necessary," she said, her voice short but controlled. "I've complied with all requests." Mark snorted derisively, bending to pick up her things without asking. His movements were slow, deliberate. Each finger flipped through her belongings as if searching for something, not evidence, but an excuse. "A woman like you driving a car like this?" he muttered suspiciously. Emily stepped closer, her hands on her hips, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "Mark, this isn't proper procedure. We don't have a legal reason to search her things." Mark waved his hand as if to shoo away a fly, not looking at her. "You have a lot to learn, rookie. This is how to keep the streets clean." Grace raised her head, her gaze steely. "You're violating my civil rights," she said clearly, fearlessly. "You have no legitimate reason to be touching my property." Mark straightened, holding up one of her credit cards as if holding incriminating evidence. "You have no right to preach here, girl. You're on my turf now." A small crowd began to gather on the sidewalk. Curious looks turned to concern. The whispers grew louder, spreading like a smoldering fire. Emily clenched her hands into fists, her throat dry. She knew, at this moment, if she didn't speak up, if she didn't act, then everything she believed in about justice, honor, and duty, would be for naught. A few people in the crowd had their phones out, holding them up to record the scene. Flashes were flashing, whispers were beginning to ripple. Grace stood still, not blinking. Even though she knew she was the center of attention, she kept her eyes on Mark, refusing to look away, refusing to show fear. Emily stood nearby, her heart clenched. She felt a chill run down her spine as she watched Mark slowly back away, toward Grace's car. His hand, unnoticed by anyone but Emily, slid deftly into the pocket of his jacket. She caught her breath as she noticed a small but deadly detail, a clear plastic bag nestled between his fingers. The bag wasn't Grace's. Emily was sure of it. She had been there all along. He hadn't taken it from Grace's belongings. "Mark!" Emily exclaimed, her voice barely above a whisper. Her throat felt dry. "What are you doing?" Mark didn't reply. He just glanced at her, a cold, knowing look, and then leaned back, leaning into the car. Emily felt her head spin as he shoved the plastic bag under the driver's seat. It was like a slow-motion movie, and she was a helpless spectator. A moment later, Mark turned. He held his hand up, like a magician who had just pulled something out of his hat. In his hand was a plastic bag containing a suspicious amount of white powder. "Oh, oh, oh," Mark's voice boomed, triumphant. "Looks like we have a bit of a drug problem here." The crowd gasped. Some stepped back, others held their phones closer to get a close-up. A few eyes turned to Grace, skeptical, scrutinizing, even disgusted. Grace stood frozen. Her eyes were wide, her gaze filled with shock and anger. "Not mine," she said, her voice firm, taking a step toward Mark. "You just stuffed it in my car. I saw it." Mark just curled his lips, his half-smile full of sarcasm. "That's a good story, Miss Williams. But I'm afraid, it won't hold." The murmurs in the crowd began to grow. Whispers, doubts, hasty conclusions. Emily felt her stomach twist. She had seen it all. She knew Grace was being set up. That Mark had done this dirty trick. But her feet wouldn't move. Fear settled over her like a heavy wet blanket. Grace turned her head. She looked straight at Emily, her eyes were pleading, almost desperate. "You saw, didn't you? Please, say something." Emily wanted to speak. Wanted to scream. But her throat felt choked. Between the whisper of her conscience and the roar of her fear, she couldn't find her voice. And then, Mark's eyes swept over her again. Cold. Warning. The look said, "Speak, and you'll regret it." Emily clenched her fists. The image of the plastic bag, and Mark's furtive movements, was still vivid in her mind. Part of her wanted to come out and tell the truth. But the other part, was more scared than ever. Her father's words echoed in her mind like a sad song that would never stop. "Integrity is never easy, my daughter, but it will make you a good person." Grace remembered the day her father had said it, when she was a child, sitting on the wooden steps of their porch, her young eyes looking up at him with all the trust in the world. And now, standing in the middle of a maelstrom of lies and corrupted power, she knew, this was the time to keep her promise. "This isn't right," Emily said, her voice trembling but clear. Each word was a sharp blade cutting through the thick tension. Mark whirled around. His face was dark, anger etched into every line. You don't know what the hell you're talking about, he growled. Keep your mouth shut. Grace stepped forward, standing tall. Her voice was calm, cold as steel tempered by fire. You can't threaten your way out of this, Mark, she said, her eyes never leaving him. I know exactly what's going on here, and neither does your partner. Mark stepped closer, too close. His hand slid to the holster at his hip, a wordless but threatening gesture. Who do you think you are? You think you're invulnerable just because you drive an expensive car? He spat out the words like poison. Let me tell you. Enough. Emily shouted, louder than she'd intended. Her voice echoed through the tense space. Her heart was pounding, but her feet were steady. You're overstepping your bounds, Mark. The crowd had gathered, no word spoken, but their eyes, their phones raised, and the silence was heavier than the screams. The evidence was being collected, second by second. Mark hesitated. His eyes darted around, finding himself no longer on safe ground. His jaw clenched, his jaw twitching, but he said nothing. Grace looked at Emily, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken understanding. Thanks for speaking up, Grace whispered, her voice calm but firm as a rock in a storm. But this isn't over. Emily nodded. A light flickered in her chest, a determination, a courage she didn't know she possessed, until now. Mark chuckled, a sneer, twisted from contempt and anger. He turned back, his eyes burning into Grace. The crowd was still there, silent but recording every move. The cell phone cameras silently did their work of justice. He leaned closer, his voice low, like the growl of a cornered animal. You think you're smarter than me? You think these people can help you? Grace didn't back down. She held her gaze, steadfast, unwavering. I don't think so, Officer Anderson, she replied, each word cold. I know I'm smarter than you. And you've just made the biggest mistake of your career. For a moment, Mark's false composure crumbled. But he quickly covered it with a cruel smile. His hands slowly pulled the handcuffs from his belt, no longer in a threatening manner, but as a final act of someone who knew he had lost, but still wouldn't let go of his sword. Step to Grace, a moment, a truth, a choice. You are under arrest for possession of a controlled substance. Officer Mark's cold words rang out, tearing apart the silence of the interrogation room. Shocked whispers rang out behind her. Emily felt her breath catch in her throat as if someone had tightened an invisible rope around her neck. This was it. The fateful moment she knew would come, when she would be forced to choose between the career she had trained for and the call of her conscience that was throbbing inside her. In her mind, her father's deep voice echoed like a reminder from the past. If you don't stand up for what's right, then you're as guilty as those who do wrong. Emily clenched her fists, her eyes shining with determination. No. She couldn't stand by and watch this happen. No, she said abruptly. Her voice rang out, strong and decisive, cutting through the tension like a cold knife. All eyes turned to her, stunned. Emily stepped forward, decisively, placing herself between Mark and Grace, a living wall of flesh and blood. She raised her hands, palms open in a defensive gesture. This isn't right, and you know it, Mark. Mark's face was red, his eyes blazing with anger. Get out of the way, rookie, he growled, don't make me report you for insubordination. Emily's voice trembled, but she stood her ground, unwavering. You planted that evidence, she said clearly. I saw you. I will not turn a blind eye to this injustice. Behind them, the crowd of police and other personnel froze, mouths agape, as if they had just witnessed a blow to the truth. The air was suffocating. A wave of shock and disbelief rippled through the room. Grace, the handcuffed woman, standing silently with her head bowed, looked up. Her eyes met Emily's. Something soft flashed across her face, gratitude, hope, and relief. She said softly, just enough for Emily to hear. Thank you. Mark's anger exploded. He stomped toward Emily, jabbing a rough finger into her chest. "You're done, do you hear me?" he hissed. "I'll make sure you never wear that badge again." Emily straightened, her eyes never leaving his. She summoned every ounce of courage she had, every shred of dignity, every shred of idealism she'd sworn to. "If that's the price of doing the right thing," she said, "then do it." For a moment it was as if the entire room held its breath. Grace looked at Emily, then took a deep breath. She knew the moment had come. She turned to Mark, and her voice rang out, calm and authoritative. "Officer Anderson," she said, "I think you should think carefully about your next move." Mark sneered, his tone mocking. "Oh, really? And why should I?" Grace didn't answer right away. She slowly reached into her coat pocket. Both officers in front of her tensed. But Grace didn't flinch. She slowly pulled out a black leather wallet, opened it, and held it up for all to see. A shiny metal badge. An insignia of undeniable power. "My name is Captain Grace Williams," she said, her eyes sharp as knives, her voice as steady as stone. "I am the new commanding officer of this police station." For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. No more words were spoken. No one dared to move. Only the truth, silent and still, touched every person in that room. Mark stared at the badge in his hand as if it had become something foreign. His mouth opened and closed, like a fish struggling desperately at the surface, unable to find the words. Emily felt her knees buckle. A jolt of dizziness running down her spine as the truth hit her like a storm without warning. She had suspected, had sensed that something was wrong. But when the truth was laid bare before her, it still took her breath away. "It can't be," she whispered, barely audible. Mark stuttered, trying to cling to the crumbling shreds of confidence beneath her feet. You can't, You didn't even ask." Grace interrupted, her voice sharp as a knife but restrained. "You just looked at me and decided I was a criminal." She lifted her head, her eyes piercing his as if to pierce through every defense. "You did it. But it doesn't matter who I am. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Not by the color of their skin, the car they drive, or where they live." Mark's face paled as the blood drained from his body. He turned, meeting the eyes of the gathering crowd. Some began to clap, others shouted in anger. The air vibrated, heavy and tense like overstretched strings. Emily took a small step back, her heart churning as if she were being swept up in a tornado. Grace turned to her, her gaze softening. "Officer Carter," she said softly but firmly. "I know it wasn't easy to stand up. But you did. And I'm grateful for that." Emily swallowed, her lips trembling. "I should have done it sooner. I'm sorry." Grace nodded, her smile fragile but sincere. "You did it when it mattered. That was the most precious thing." Mark stood there, frozen, finally stuttering out. "Captain, I can explain." "No," Grace interrupted him, her voice hard as steel this time. "You can't. What you did today goes against everything this badge stands for." She raised her hand, pointing at the silver badge that glinted in the light. "Turn in your weapon and badge. You are suspended, effective immediately." Mark trembled. His hands fumbled with his gun, then his badge. When he placed them on the table, he glared at Grace. His face contorted with anger, frustration, and a fear he didn't dare name. "You can't do this. You don't know what it's like out there." He growled, the words cracking in his throat. "I've been protecting these streets for 20 years. Grace didn't blink. Her face was impassive. But there was fire in her eyes, fire that wasn't loud, that wasn't consuming. But steady and burning. "Protecting?" she pressed. "Is that what you call it? How many lives have been destroyed because of your prejudice? You don't protect, Mark. You control. You judge. And today, you're responsible for it. In the silent room, her words rang like a wake-up call. How many people have you framed to protect your twisted ego? How many truths, how many destinies, have you sacrificed, just to maintain the position you should have used to protect others? The noise of the crowd seemed to bounce off the brick wall, echoing and breaking, falling piece by piece, exposing the truth that had been hidden for so long. This time, the crowd was not silent. They had Grace. Her presence was the spark that ignited the long-simmering wave of anger. The cries of "Justice! Justice!" rang out, strong, unceasing. A woman in the front row shouted, her voice cracking with anger. "You are a disgrace to the uniform." A man standing next to her added, his voice low and hurt. "We have endured this for too long." Emily stood behind, her eyes looking over the shoulders of those in front. The crowd grew larger, each shout an undeniable accusation. She felt her heart constrict. This was no longer Mark's story. This was an indictment of a system that allowed people like him to exist, unchecked, undisciplined. A system rotten from within, where oaths became an excuse to cover up wrongdoing. Grace stepped forward. She didn't need to shout. Her voice was steady enough to silence everyone. Each word she uttered carried weight, like a hammer pounding on a door that had been too long unopened. "This isn't just about me." She turned, facing the crowd, each face, each look of despair and anger. "This is about holding people like him accountable. This is about making sure that no one, is above the law. Not even those who have sworn to uphold it." Mark stepped forward, his face red, his hand clutching the badge as if clinging to the power that was slipping away from him. "You think you're a hero?" he roared, his voice shaking with anger. "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to face real criminals. Here, you sit behind that clean desk, and I put my life on the line every day out there." Grace looked at him. Her eyes weren't angry, nor mocking. Just a stillness as sharp as a knife. "And you think that gives you the right to plant evidence?" she asked. "You think because you're in uniform, you have the right to threaten and humiliate innocent people? You're not risking your life, Mark. You're ruining someone else's." Emily felt her throat tighten. Everything she had suspected, everything she had seen in suppressed reports, ignored warnings, it was all clear now, undeniable. Grace turned to her, her gaze softening. She was gentle, but no less determined. "Officer Carter. I know this isn't easy for you. But coming forward today is a courageous thing. Don't lose it." Emily blinked. She took a deep breath and nodded, her words as light as a breath. "I won't." Mark stood there, his eyes a mixture of anger, fear, and helplessness. He clenched his badge in his hand as if it could shield him from the stark truth before him. "You're making a mistake, Captain," he said, his voice a faint threat. "People like you don't last long in this system." Grace took a step forward. Her eyes never left his, her gaze as sharp as a final blade. "People like me," she repeated. "You mean people who believe in justice?" The crowd erupted in applause again, the shouts of "Grace! Grace!" thundering, this time cheering not just for a person, but for a truth, a new hope, people who believe in equality. "If that's a mistake, it's one I'm willing to make." Grace's words rang out like thunder across the dark sky of injustice. There was a long moment of silence, and then the crowd erupted in applause. The faint sounds of protest were instantly swallowed up by a rising tide of support. Hundreds of people, of all colors and ages, stood shoulder to shoulder, as if they needed only a spark to ignite the flames of change. Grace turned to the nearest person, a teenager holding a shaking phone, eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you for recording this," she said, her voice low and steady. "Make sure it gets shared. They need to see it." On the other side, Mark's face, Lieutenant Anderson, was red with anger. His jaw clenched, his eyes blazing. He hissed through gritted teeth. "You're throwing me under the bus for publicity. This is a show, a farce. Grace didn't back down. She stood as straight as an oak in a storm. No, Mark. This is accountability. Something that, she paused, looking him straight in the eye, you've never really understood. The sirens were coming closer. Echoing through the streets like a reminder that change was coming, whether anyone was ready or not. Mark let out a gasp. Under the flashing red and green lights, his shoulders slumped. With trembling hands he removed his badge and holster. The arrogance fell from him, leaving him naked, and small. Emily, Grace's former colleague, now a reporter, stood on the sidelines, unable to tear her eyes away from the scene. A storm of emotions swirled inside her, redemption, guilt, and a sliver of hope she'd long thought she'd lost. As the second patrol car rolled up, 2 officers got out, their eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Grace. "Take Mr. Anderson to the station," Grace ordered, her voice unwavering. "He's suspended until a full investigation." Mark huffed. "You can't be serious. This is my territory, my team." Grace didn't bother to turn around. Not anymore. The crowd erupted in cheers. Some were in tears, others raised their fists, chanting Grace's name. And still others stood silently, eyes staring into the distance, as if they were seeing the shadow of someone they'd lost to injustice. The 2 officers reluctantly handcuffed Mark, leading him through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Justice for Malik. Justice for Rosa. Grace for all of us." Grace took a deep breath, turning to face the hundreds of pairs of eyes watching. She raised her voice, each word reverberating in the hearts of those listening. "This is just the beginning." Her voice was firm, unwavering. "Today, we have taken a stand, against corruption, against prejudice. But it does not stop here. Change does not come from one person. We must all demand accountability." The silence stretched, then broke into applause, chants, and uncontrollable tears. And in that moment, amid the darkness and the flashing lights of patrol cars, hope was ignited. The crowd was silent for a moment, and then, like a wave, applause erupted, mixed with cheers of approval. Not empty noise, but the sound of hope, of unspoken support. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She couldn't speak for a moment, just stood there, listening to her heart beat faster. She knew this moment wasn't just about Grace or Mark. It went beyond individuals, it was about community, about trust that had been broken, and now slowly being restored. She could feel the eyes on her, no longer doubt, but trust. Trust that the system, while imperfect, had people like her and Grace working to keep it going, for everyone. As the air began to quiet, Grace stepped closer. Her normally stern face softened, her eyes filled with warmth and respect. "You did the right thing today," Grace said, her voice low and sincere. "I know it wasn't easy." Emily nodded, her voice a breath of fresh air. "I was scared. I didn't know if I'd lose everything." Grace put her hand on her shoulder, steady, a beacon in the storm. "You didn't lose anything. What really matters, you still have it. It's our integrity that defines us, not the badge on our chest." Emily blinked, fighting back tears. A pride rose within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in years, she understood the true meaning of the phrase, to serve and protect. A local film crew was there, cameras ready. Grace took a deep breath. She knew she was about to say something that would resonate far beyond today, far beyond this neighborhood. She turned, looking directly into the lens. Her voice was calm, but firm. "What happened today is a stark reminder, no one is above the law. Not even those sworn to uphold it." She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "We have a long way to go. But change doesn't begin with big decisions. It begins with moments like this, when someone chooses to do what's right, even when it's hardest." The camera recorded each word as if it were etched into history. Emily took a step back, letting Grace take center stage, where she deserved to be. She glanced at the crowd as it slowly dispersed, but something remained in the air: faith, hope, and determination. For Emily, this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could finally live up to her oath. Not for the system, but for the people it existed to serve. For Grace, it was a chance to reshape a broken system from within, with truth, courage, and commitment. And for the community, it was a spark, small, but enough to ignite a larger movement for justice, for real change. Mark's police siren faded on the horizon. An old chapter ended, not with anger, but with awakening. Grace and Emily stood side by side. Neither spoke, but they both knew, they were ready, for what was next.